Trustees meeting tonight. May we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Ankman. Here. Trustee Shiloh.
Here.
Trustee Dewart.
Here.
Trustee Markey.
Here.
Trustee Meyer.
Here.
Trustee Toll.
Here.
Everybody please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have the consideration of the minutes of the February 24th, 2020 Village Board meeting. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
So moved by so moved,
Ms. Markey?
thank you, was it Ms. Markey? Thanks. Wasn't sure, didn't have my little hearing thing put in. Okay, do I have a second, please?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dewart. Any comments or additions, corrections? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
At this point in time, we offer time for people who would like to speak to the board on anything that is not on this evening's agenda. Do we have anyone that wishes to do so? Okay, we also then set the order of the meeting, and I'm going to suggest that we move up number 15 and number 16. Do I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Thank you. Second? That was Mr. Meyer. Do I have a second?
Second.
And second by Mr. Toll. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Move that up here. An ordinance granting a special use permit for a I'm sorry, I wanted to put 15 first, excuse me. An ordinance amending sections 10-15-3 and 10-15-4, the Lake Bluff zoning regulations to permit applicants to seek height modifications as part of the approval of a planned mixed-use development. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
You're good? Yep.
I know I'm good,
Okay.
thank you. Who was the,
Mrs. Ankerman?
Mrs. Ankerman, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Markey. In November and December, the PCZBA conducted workshops regarding a proposed 20-unit condominium redevelopment of the former PNC Bank site at 120 East Scranton Avenue, also known as Block 3 of the Central Business District. At the conclusion of the December workshop, the PCZBA requested the Village Board initiate the process to eliminate the 2-story or 30-foot maximum height restriction applicable to the planned mixed-use development, unless a variation is received. At its January 13, 2020 meeting, the Village Board voted to submit the application for a text amendment as requested. The PCZBA conducted its public hearing on Wednesday, February 19th, and considered 3 options presented by staff, including take no action and leave the height limitation in place, delete the height limitation applicable to planned mixed-use developments. A developer would still need to seek a modification and satisfy certain standards to exceed the applicable underlying height limitation. In addition to number 2, adjust the underlying height limitations applicable to Block 3 on the adjacent residential zones only when pursuing a unified development. No modification would be needed to exceed the applicable underlying height limitation. Following considerable public comment and discussion, the PCZBA voted 3-2. The Village Board take no action and leave the height limitation and associated variation process in place. On February 24th, 2020, the Village Board accepted a staff report regarding the PCZBA's recommendation, received public comment, and following a discussion, directed staff to prepare an ordinance to eliminate the height limitation and associated variation process applicable to the planned mixed-use developments. And before I ask staff for any comments, if they have, do we have anyone in the audience would like to speak? And I would like, as the same as last time, please limit your comments to 3 minutes apiece, respectfully. Do I have anybody that would like to speak? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Becky Kluchka.
I live at 131 East Scranton, Lake Bluff. We live in an area that volunteerism is hardly a priority in many homes. People are busy, and the lack of drive to give up their precious time with family and friends for countless offer over situations that are frustrating and thankless. As I stand here, I feel the PCBA members and their recent predecessors should be recognized for their support for the voices of No 3-on-3. I would also like to apologize to them for the waste of their precious time, as well as the frustration they were subjected to, only to have this board seemingly ignore their recommendation. I stood at this podium before the PCBA meeting and choked. It was because my husband stood here and twice received accolades from the village boards for his tireless hours serving and protecting this village as a volunteer fireman and EMT. I stood that night for the second time at this same podium defending our home. As I explained the other evening, we have lived in our home for 34 years. We have raised 3 boys in this village. We have given countless hours and sacrifice to this village. And the tradition is continuing on with our 3 sons as firemen paramedics here in the village. We understand change. Do you remember what the library looked like 34 years ago? Our home was slated as a parking lot after the village commissioned the future planning of the Central Business District. We bought property on Route 41 in the Lake Bluff zip code, only to be handed off to North Chicago governing body because it was in the best interest of the village. We were told that after we didn't even get a chance to plead our case to any board, we just had to accept the decision. Here, we all gather again because a couple people bought lots in our village, which I commend them for their purchases. However, that was their risk. Now, the rest of us have to tirelessly keep steward over this intricate piece of transition in our unique community that we all have chosen to settle in because of its quaint and neighborly atmosphere. I feel someone needs to bring our home's perspective. Someone needs to stand up to make everyone remember how you ended up in your chairs. We trusted you all to preserve and protect what we feel and treasure as our home village-wide. The last 2 times the PCBA ruled, they said no. And if it needs to be said clearer or in some other way, then let it be stated by the Kluchkas that no means no. Projects that cannot be within the parameters of the PCBA will either have to adjust or find a different community. I hope as a board you understand and listen to what all we are committed to in our village and our values. I thank you for your time and your patience with me.
Thank you, baby. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
You've heard me before, but actually I have a question for you. I don't understand number 15, a planned mixed-use development. What does that actually mean? Does that mean you have retail too?
Drew, you want to give the,
If you have any, I can, happy to answer this. You want him to speak the whole
Yeah,
time? I'm
yeah,
happy to answer
okay.
now, or if you want.
well, we can do that later. Normally, this is not for questions or comments.
I
that you say.
apologize.
That's okay, that's all right, but he will be happy to talk to you afterwards about
Okay.
that.
I can do it
Okay.
after he talks, too,
Right.
so.
Or after you chat, what else you'd like to say.
Thank you, Kathy.
Hi, I'm Holly Volkert. I live at 108 East North Avenue. Thank you for your time. My neighbors and I have spent years discussing possible opportunities for Block 2 and 3 with this board that would benefit everyone involved. Nothing has come of those efforts except the 30-foot height restriction that was put in place 4 years ago. Now that is being taken away as well. From my experience with this process through the years, I have learned that I'm afraid that nothing that any of us here today have to say will be heard. This governing body has already made up their mind that they will push through their agenda, even though their own appointed advisory board recommends maintaining this height limitation. Even though at the last meeting, when no one spoke in favor of removing the 30-foot height restriction except the realtor representing the upcoming proposal, the board still unanimously voted to remove it. And to say there is no development on the table is a farce. Everyone sitting in this room knows there's a development on the table, although it may have yet to be formally proposed. So with all that being said, I truly hope the board will tonight be open to hearing the following considerations. I suggest that a 3D model be created of the current CBD and immediate surrounding areas with exact height and distant representations of all existing buildings and homes. As developments are presented, it would be very prudent of this board to place the parameters of the proposed development into this model so everyone can truly see the height differences, bulk comparisons, and shade variances. Number two, I do feel it's imperative to give interested developers some type of parameters to work with. With an open slate, they will come with all sorts of propositions, and you'll have to spend much time, energy, and tax dollars in order to discuss numerous proposals. And then you will probably have to be firm on reasoning with your reasoning on denying it, but when you have no parameters to back up for that reasoning, you're setting yourself up for a potentially difficult situation without having any specifications in place. Number three, I recommend an addendum to this amendment be added that does not allow any member of this governing board or subcommittees that are opining on these propositions to have any vested interest, be it financial or as a resident, on the projects they are considering. I feel any proposal brought to the table should be transparent in regards to investors, funding, and contractors. Additionally, I think it's only fair to include in this amendment that anyone on this governing board or subcommittees that will be discussing and voting on a project, as well as their extended family members, be prohibited from residing at the approved property for a minimum of 5 years after the completion of the project. Lastly, I recommend an article that will allow property tax credits to be given to surrounding homes that show a significant decrease in sunlight exposure, significant increase in traffic, or other detriments due to a PMD project that is built. It is only fair that if Block 3 property owners are allowed a financial profit at the expense of their neighbors, that the village compensates these homeowners in exchange for the tax dollars the village will be generating from the project. In conclusion, I would like to point out that the Roanoke Group was the first developer who brought the proposal for Block 3. The same Roanoke Group that owns the disastrous Stonebridge property. Although the parameters of that PMD included maintenance and upkeep of the historic manor house, Roanoke Group has been allowed to let the house dilapidate without any consequences. They have yet to have any residents inside that development inhabited. In fact, its gates have been chained off for years. And now they have the audacity to come to this board and ask for a demolition permit for the manor house, the one treasure that property holds. Their actions show you exactly what they think about the rules and regulations this governing board enacts. My point being is that developers will renege on their promises, and the chance of them doing so when they are not working with a governing body that has a history of not holding firm with contractual obligations and is wishy-washy with building parameters. Thank goodness Roanoke did not build on Block 3. I would just ask this board to think carefully over the decisions they are making, consider the suggestions just made, and stand firm on your expectations. If not, the repercussions will be around for generations to come, and we'll have your name attached to it. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak?
Hi there. My comments will be lightweight in comparison to the research and the thought that was given by these other people I heard. So I'm worried about inconsistencies. When I see people, trustees saying, hey, if you have a guest over at your house 2 weeks out of the year, your neighbor's property value is going to decrease. If you have a guest over at your house 2 weeks out of the year, your neighbor's property is going to decrease. Yet, you're building 20-unit condominium buildings that clearly will decrease the neighboring properties. And that's okay to move forward. I'm not following that inconsistency, and I would love to speak with that. I know the issue now is the 3-on-3. But the property value issue is a real one. I gave authentic, reliable research that said having guests over 2 weeks a year for any resident is not going to decrease the property value of your neighbor. And yet you're getting this? Of course it's going to decrease the neighboring properties. So that's it. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Kate Breon, 610 Lincoln Avenue. I'd like to say that I agree with everything that Holly said. It was well said. And I agree that it is nonsensical to even argue that this is simply about making it possible to hear proposals, plural, because it's not. There's just the one. And that would be the reason that Mr. Anderson workshopped the proposal and has been at all of these meetings and is here tonight. And there's evidence of it. And I submitted a letter to you all. I don't know if you took the time to read it or not, but in the packets for the PCZBA workshops, there has been correspondence to this effect. So a letter from Mr. Anderson himself states that he is, on behalf of the property owners, submitting a concept plan for Block 3, and hopeful that by sharing this information, quote, prior to a formal application, we will receive feedback, et cetera. The next correspondence that was included in a PCZBA packet in December of last year was from one of the property owners. He said, as he was seeking support from friends and neighbors, quote, ultimately, we are seeking relief from the village board to exceed the current height restriction of 30 feet. But most damning of all, and I quote, we've accepted reserve payments on 3 units already. Really? So what are we really doing here? What we're really doing here is in response to a comment made by Mr. Anderson at the February 19th PCZBA meeting. If you don't support this text amendment, I'll pull the proposal. That's what we're really doing here. And 5 days later, you gave him his unanimous support that he wanted. That's not governing, and that's not making good policy. That's capitulating, and it's a bad idea. In 2016, you said something you meant, I think, and you voted for it unanimously. And not a single circumstance that would affect neighbors has changed. Trish is right. They'll still be negatively impacted. And yes, there's a process. But when 3 reserve payments have been taken on a proposal already, forgive me, I'm a little skeptical. And I just can't believe that this is happening and that we're all just going to go along with it. The emperor's not wearing any clothes. That's pretty obvious.
Good evening, Mark Stolzenberg. We've met.
Thank you, Madam President. The key responsibility of this board is to assure that development, as important as it is to our economic growth and vitality, nevertheless always is made consistent with the unique character of our community. And development must be carried out in a manner such that all voices are heard and our best efforts go into reaching a balanced and fair result. Indeed, government works best when the people step up, participate, and have their voices heard. When we deal with developers, we must use our collective talents in the best interests of our citizens and its community. We should stand united in these matters and not divided. In that spirit, I am opposed to a 3rd story on Block 3. I do not want to see Lake Bluff transformed by big, bulky developments in the middle of town. A 3rd story will have many negative effects on Lake Bluff. A 3rd story will block light, air, and it will alter the aesthetics of the downtown. Those are all public costs that increase the developer's profits because it can build more units on the same footprint. In this sense, something is being taken from our citizens, and they are not getting anything in return. It feels unfair, and it is unfair. Government has tools to mitigate these negatives for the public good. let us use those tools. Therefore, I move that the proposed ordinance be modified so that it prohibits the building of a third story. My understanding is that this is accomplished by placing in the ordinance a 30-foot height restriction. There should be no 3-on-3. Any developer must make its plans within that constraint and further stand public scrutiny of all the details of any plan. Thank you to everyone who has been involved in public comment for their input and participation, and I so move.
Thank you. Do I have?
Thank you, Madam.
To date, I've not seen a better justification or explanation for the 30-foot, 2-story height limitation and the associated variation procedure. And who is it expressed by? This board. These are your words. This was your justification in September 2016, which I have distributed, so you can look at that as well when you vote today, for enacting the 30-foot, 2-story limitation and associated variation procedure. What's changed since September 2016? Big buildings still block light and air. We're still a small town. What's changed? I'm still struggling with that, and I think many of my fellow neighbors are as well. Now, what's going to happen here if you remove this very objective standard that we have, the 30-foot, 2-story limitation, and the very strict variation procedure, which, as we agreed in 2016, those are the rules to play by because they're the rules that protect residents. What's going to happen? 1015.3 of the PMD contains a bunch of standards that mean whatever you want them to mean. They provide absolutely no protection for the families and the taxpayers who have chosen to invest in this town and who have chosen to raise their families here. And what's your legacy going to be if you revoke the 30-foot, 2-story limitation? You told us in 2016 there will be no 3-on-3. That meant wherever the reach of the PMD ordinance, 30 feet, 2 stories, or a very vigorous variation standard, you'll break that promise if you vote on that tonight. If you remove that tonight, you're breaking that promise. And you will have put the interests of developers and land speculators above families and taxpayers in this community. Keep your word. Choose families over developers. Let's keep the 30-foot, 2-story limitation and move on with our lives. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Brad Anderson, 511 East Prospect. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I read Kate Brand's letter, and it mentioned my name 11 times, and so I feel compelled to at least represent myself. I'm thankful for your careful consideration of the change to the zoning. I think what it will do is allow for a developer to come forward and have a future development looked at objectively and criticized by both the PCZBA and eventually the village board. And I think that's really all this change is going to do, is going to encourage someone to come forward with a thoughtful plan who's willing to work with the PCZBA and the village board to get something finally done after 4 years. Thank you.
Mickey Collins, 217 East Scranton, an acknowledged zoning geek. I think many of you know this, so I'm just going to point out a couple zoning principles here that I don't think I've heard mentioned. So this sounds really reasonable, that you just kind of wait and see what gets proposed for a specific site, but that's actually considered incredibly bad zoning, and there are a couple concepts that go with that. It's called spot zoning, and sometimes it's even called special privilege if you're doing something for one developer that you might not do for another developer. I don't know if you've watched the PCZBA, hearing Becky Klutschka made a very moving presentation there about, the Klutschkas are a family that have contributed so much to Lake Bluff. And they came in front of the zoning board with a change that they wanted, and they were denied. And they, she was asking that question, well, why can this applicant get all this special consideration? Those are serious legal things, right, Peter? So I think this should all be kept in mind, that the best zoning is when you set a standard, it guides developers, it guides the proposals, but it also aligns with the goals and the desires of the community. And that should be set first. So really, the one and only reason to want to change the height for this particular lot is that you think the entire CBD should be 3 stories. I mean, that's kind of legitimate zoning looking into the future. I don't think too many residents really feel that way. I think they like this small-scale Mayberry that we have here. But we should keep those very much in consideration. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
I confess an error, I totally handed out the wrong document. That's why I meant to hand out. Too exuberant.
Mark? Was this?
Yeah,
I was trying to understand.
yeah, no, there was nothing to understand.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Terry Moran. My family moved here in about 1954, I think it was. And I'm still living in our old house on North Avenue. And when we moved here from Chicago, there was a barn in the backyard. And my father loved to tell this story that the person that he bought the house from was so grateful that Dad bought it so he could leave the hustle bustle of Lake Bluff. And hopefully, I won't have to leave the hustle bustle of Lake Bluff. Thanks.
Terry Bleck, 17 East North Avenue. I live in one of the townhomes on Block 1. I bought my townhome 27 years ago. I own it, and that was the only thing I could afford in order to live in Lake Bluff. My dad was the village engineer for many years in Lake Bluff before George Russell. All my family lived here, all went to school here, and this is where I'd love to spend the rest of my life. The only thing I could afford was my townhome. When I moved there, everybody that lived there owned their own unit. Today, Brad Anderson owns 4 units, and there's 2 other people that own. I no longer have say in my association. I have no control over anything. I'm more or less like a renter, paying rent. Now, you could probably read the writing on the wall that if he owns 4 units and there's only 6 units there, that sooner or later, I'm going to be out looking for somewhere to live, and I'm not going to be able to afford to live in a house in Lake Bluff, buy a house in Lake Bluff. So I can't say that this 20-unit, 3-story, big brick building is anything to do about the betterment of Lake Bluff or looking out for residents that want to come and live in Lake Bluff. When a few of the units where I live went into foreclosure, we had so many people come looking for homes that they could buy and own in Lake Bluff because it was affordable. And somehow, Brad was able to buy them all at auction. That's not leaving any room for young families coming in, single people that want to come in, or even retirees that want to live in Lake Bluff. They can't afford some $750,000 to $1 million place. That's not what Lake Bluff is about. I want to stay here in Lake Bluff, and I'm not going to be moved out of my place because of greed. And that's basically what this boils down to. It's not for the betterment of the village, it's greed. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
My name's Tony Mahalski. Officially, my house is 757 Lincoln. Currently, I'm renting down the street because my wife and I moved here about July of last year. We've been around the country, but we really enjoyed this small town atmosphere. I do think it does need some development downtown in terms of business, but if you actually look at residential housing and the need to express the, raise the elevation, I don't necessarily understand why that is. So there are so in your guidelines, right, which right now I'm renovating my house completely down to the studs. And I have been required by the city and the by rules that you have to install sprinkler systems, upgrade water lines, and other things, even though I'm not changing the overall footprint of the house. So you put rules and regulations in place, people come in, they're expected to follow them. I'm spending a lot more money as a result of it. Now, I knew that going in before I started the project. What I don't understand is why you would come back and require or break what you did 4 years ago by the video, right? And I'll admit, I came here not anticipating to talk tonight. But what I don't understand is why you'd go back on what you agreed to do for residential housing, which if you look at the number of homes in this area, there's actually a number on the market that have been out there for a strong period of time, over a year, that are in the affordable range. Now, they might need some work, but just to add more condominiums doesn't make sense, when in actuality, I think you need a little bit of maybe restaurants or small stores, grocery stores, bakeries, those types of things downtown. So that's all I want to leave you with.
Good evening, I'm Jean Nemi, I live at 580 Evanston Avenue. My comments are around guidelines as well, and I have a few questions after being up here a number of times, and I know we've got a number of people that have given you solid reasons as to why this isn't a good idea for Lake Bluff. We've given you both concrete economic reasons, emotional reasons because of why we all love Lake Bluff and why we moved here. And after all of this, I still have a few remaining questions, particularly after the outcome of the last board meeting. I want to know this. Why, after the PZZBA board voted 3-2 to keep current zoning in place, are you voting against them and recommending to remove the height restriction? Why, when you have nearly 600 residents who have signed a petition asking you to keep that height restriction, are you voting against them? Why, when numerous residents have stood up at all of these meetings, including the last board meeting, and asked you to please keep the height restriction in place, why are you voting against the citizens you represent and asking for the height restriction to be removed? And the biggest question that I have lingering is, why, after only one person stood up at that same meeting and told you that if you didn't vote to remove the restriction, that he and his partners would pull the current proposal for a 3-story condominium? How does that lead the board to decide unanimously to vote with one person and against the many? How are you representing the people if you aren't listening to the desires of the many? And I'm asking all of this honestly because this process has been new to me. This process has been exhausting and emotional. We feel like, and I'll speak for myself, that we've come from a place of willing to work with development. It's not that we don't want condominiums or some sort of development on that land, but we do believe there need to be guidelines in place to help any development come in know what to propose. And so I end where I started with, why are we removing the guidelines and just opening it up to anything at this point, after all of the feedback that you've gotten from the citizens that you represent? Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Can I just respond?
No. No. This isn't a debate. Anyone else? Okay, I'll open it up. Any comments, questions from the board?
Yes, we have a motion, and a second, yeah.
Well, I've already done the motion.
Yeah.
I have the motion.
Well, here's where I'm coming from, having heard all of this. It's pretty clear to me that the neighbors don't want this new project, and that they've familiarized themselves with this new project, and they have spoken. I have not heard a compelling case to the contrary, and that's enough to vote no, and my vote is no.
Would anyone else like to speak?
I'm just a little bit confused. When you say no, you're saying no to the amendment to,
Vote no to the first reading of agenda item number 15.
I see what you're saying. Okay. I guess, once again, I wanted to ask for clarification from Drew or Peter. If this 30-foot number is removed, underlying zoning says what? It's my understanding that underlying zoning is what people can, or what a developer could build without asking for any modification, variation. What would that be?
So if a developer approached the village and applied for a planned mixed-use development, as it stands today, without this amendment, they would be required to seek a variation if it was greater than the height allowed under the underlying zoning district for Block 3. There's two different zoning districts, right? The eastern parcels are 4, and that height limit is 34 feet based off its size and area. And the property on the west, the 3 parcels to the west, are CBD zoning, which would have the 2-story or 30 feet height limit that it would have to operate within. And then a developer would have to seek variations from those height restrictions if they wanted to go higher than that. Under the proposed, the ordinance that's in front of you tonight, if that amendment would be approved, they would have a different process. They would go through the modification process. The underlying height restrictions don't change, just the pathway that they would have to seek relief from them do, in terms of the standards that they would have to address. But it's not a building as of right. The underlying zoning district height restriction still stays in place, and they still have to go through that process and address those standards, as well as addressing the special use permit standards associated with the PMD tool.
So that to me is an important distinction, is that by removing this, the underlying zoning is still in place. We're not saying anything goes. We're not saying, hey, it's the Wild West. We're saying that the underlying zoning is still there, and to do something that is outside of that, there's a process. And that process involves the PCZBA looking at specific proposals, plans, developments, and saying whatever it is they want to say. And then that same, after all the tweaks and back and forth, that would then come to us. And we would be able to look at it and say yes or no. I'm of the feeling that I'd like to see what could be creatively done, specifically because I like the idea of perhaps having more input on the green space. And also looking at, with lots 4 and 5 on the eastern end, those with the underlying zoning being a little bit higher, 34 feet. I almost look at those, that added height, could that be creatively used somewhere else on the development? I don't know, but there's a lot of variables, green space, that if we had the ability for somebody to have some of these variables that could be creatively used, we might get something beautiful and that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And I just feel like I'm interested in seeing possibilities. I'm not interested in having a 3-story big block of boring that everybody's going to say is unattractive. I do think that we have a need for housing, multifamily housing. My own family is an example. When my parents moved here 7 years ago, they ended up purchasing a condominium in Lake Forest because there was nothing here available that checked some of the boxes that there aren't that type of housing available readily. So from my own personal story, I feel like there is a housing need. We've talked about a diversity of housing. I would like it if it's not all super high end of the spectrum, you know, $1 million condominiums. But I'm not the developer. I don't get to say, you know, these are all the pieces that are involved, but I do get to say, this is what we would like to see. So my vote at allowing that 30-foot restriction was to inspire more creativity, to accomplish some larger goals that we haven't seen before, feeling that we always had the ability to say no at some point in time. I think there is a lack of trust at this point by the public that the board is acting independently. There have been accusations that we haven't been acting in the interest of the community, and therefore maybe there are some other factors at play, and that we aren't being transparent. I don't know of anything like that that is factual or true, and that's nothing that pertains to me. I like the idea of seeing a 3D model of whatever is being developed. I think that's very attainable with, you know, 3D software that's available so that you can see something more than a building. You can see context. That seems like a reasonable request. I feel like we're really in a tough spot where if we take away that 30-foot restriction, we are enforcing the perception that we are being not transparent, and there are some things that are at play that the public isn't aware of. And so I'm really at I have a very important goal of fulfilling a diversity of housing, seeing what creative solutions there can be, protecting some green space, but it's all something that's nebulous and it hasn't actually been presented. And I'm also against people with very real concerns that I'm gonna not like living next to this development and it's gonna hurt my property values. I'm really torn. I initially voted to remove it so that we could hear some more ideas, so that we could have the ability to say yes to this good thing and no to that not good thing. I'm really concerned about the lack of trust at this point, though. I really am. I feel like I'm not alone in that we are feeling the pressure that we're not being trusted and that this body has some other motives, and I'm not aware of any others that do. I don't know. I'm really torn at this point.
Okay,
Really torn.
okay. Regis?
So I've given a lot of thought also to that development. I mean, I moved here because we have a special community, and I used to live on East Washington and Moffett, and I saw around my house 9 houses being built, and I did lose sun, and I got flooded, and I did spend actually a lot of money trying to keep my place harmonious to what it used to be before those 9 houses were developed. So my objective is we need to have harmonious development. We have blight. We have a place that is not being developed. We have a bank that is not that pretty. And frankly, we all stand for living in a community that we all love, literally. So I really believe that Block 3 needs development. That doesn't mean that we need a block that blocks the sunlight from quite a few residents. I believe that we need mixed development. We have people who want to downsize and we have nowhere to go in the city. And I'm very sensitive to what was said in the last 9 comments, I counted. So we need to do something, okay? I would like to listen to development, including a harmonious development, and I'm serious about that. I really liked the transparency comment. We need to know what's happening. I believe that, following Barb, that people are doubtful to what is happening on our board. And I can say that I've seen transparency and I've seen people willing to work and I've seen people willing to be fully transparent. We need to keep the interest of the neighbors at heart, okay? I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to vote for the height restriction removal, but I'm not sold to what is happening right now, okay? And I'm absolutely serious about transparency and non-conflict clause. I thought it was a really good comment.
Okay, Mark?
I had mentioned at previous meeting that, and I would continue to say that I am interested to find out what a creative architect or developer might have to offer to the village and to provide that flexibility. I would say that this is not about a particular development. This is not about, in my mind, this is not about Brad's development. That we're not voting Brad's development, Mr. Anderson's development, up or down. I'm not. Ms. Volkert brought, I think, up some very specific things. I've mentioned in my previous comments on this, the subject that I think we need to be attentive to the functional attributes of whatever might be on this property. And that would include models, and we have talked about that. And it would include an analysis or analyses of daylight coverage and whatnot. Those are, I think, to me anyway, very critical attributes that need to be explored. I think finally, the notion that, and I think this is where Trustee Ankenman was coming from, the notion that somehow or another that this board is not in some way, shape, or form transparent about this. I think that I can say that there is no conflict insofar as I'm concerned. I am not personally aware of any of issue here. We're asked to be sensitive and to make aware that we are or are not aware of any conflicts of interest. And that's something that you need to know that this board takes very, very seriously. For a board member to not recuse him or herself is a very, very serious and legal matter. And the community needs to understand that. Mr. Friedman can talk about that, I think, in more detail than I can. But for one of us to have an interest in a property like this and not recuse him or herself would be a very, very serious offense. A very serious offense. And if you're not aware, when anything is discussed like that, when even the matter is discussed at all, not just a vote, the individual is excused from the room. So there's no monitoring, there's no listening, no participation, nothing. That person is completely out of the room and out of any undue influence before the public. So, is there? No. Did I adequately? Thank you.
Ms. Markey?
So I echo a lot of the same comments as my colleagues, especially what Mark just mentioned. I truly feel everyone sitting up here has the best interests in the village, and I think we all spend countless hours reading and researching and struggling with some of these decisions. So we appreciate people coming in, talking, and it does matter, and it does make a difference, and it does help us coming to these decisions. So for all of you that are here tonight that came and spoke again, we appreciate it. I was not on the board when this issue first came around. So this is my first time really understanding and digging into all this information. When I was originally looking at the text amendment and what it represented, my feeling was it would give us as a board, more opportunity to look at different projects. I'm certainly not looking at Mr. Anderson's project. It's not on my radar. I was purely looking at it as a way of, is it more creative? Can we find more creative things to put in that space? Clearly, we're struggling with what to put in that space and how to manage that space from economic reasons. And when you tie it into what we're trying to do with our strategic plan and get some residential housing that kind of completes Block 3 into the residential zoning. I was part of that strategic plan when we put it together in 2017, was it? In there. And so I understand the need for that kind of housing downtown. And I also feel like, as a community, we need to be open to change. And maybe we're not quite ready for that now, but we still need to be open to change. We need to be open to growth. I live in what a lot of people call the North Terrace, which is just a little bit south of Tangley Oaks. And someone told me when I first moved here that when the terraces were put in, people were fighting the terraces being put in. And they didn't want growth on the west side of the tracks, and they didn't want the terraces in. So think about all your friends and neighbors that live in the terraces. And if no change had happened, none of those houses would be built, and you wouldn't have any of those neighbors. And so I think from the standpoint of being open to if something went in where people were living, you'd have new neighbors, and you'd have more residents. And I don't think it's always, I just would hope that we could be open to change. So I don't know that we're ready for it now. I don't feel like it, and I feel like the concern with transparency on this board, again, as my colleagues have said, I'm very concerned that people feel like we're not trying to do what's in the best interest of the village. And that's kind of where I am tonight.
Aaron?
So I appreciate the public comments tonight. I think some of it was very constructive. I think it actually may have provided some direction to this board. Some of the comments were accusatory, which I did not appreciate, and in fact find somewhat insulting. From the start of my participation in this conversation, I've been opposed to 3 stories, though open-minded to seeing other projects, seeing proposals, seeing creative solutions that might not quite fit within the 30-foot parameter. I am still in opposition to anything more than 2 stories, so I wonder if perhaps we could do a 4th option of eliminate the 30-foot maximum and maybe do a 2-story, keep it at 2 stories though. I don't know if that's something that we could do tonight or if that would have to come back, but that would be something that I would be able to get behind. Additionally, I just want to make the comment that the majority of people that have come to these meetings have spoken against 3 stories, but we have received a lot of public comment via email, via letters, via just verbal interactions. So it's not skewed totally one-sided. I think there is quite a bit of support in the village for a 3-story development. They just may not be as vocal as those that come to these meetings. Having said that, I'm torn as well. I think there's the trust issue, but at the same time, I'm fine with leaving it in place as is for now. If we think that that's going to restrict the options of developments that are proposed to us, I guess I can live with that, because again, I've been against 3 stories from the start. If this board decides to eliminate the restriction, I'd be okay with that too, because that doesn't approve any particular development. We can still say no to anything we believe is too big, too bulky, doesn't provide the daylight and the options for the neighbors. So I'm really fine with it either way. I'm probably leaning more towards keeping the restriction, only because in my mind, that is what I see on that spot as something no more than 2 stories.
Anybody else want to add anything? Well, that's what I love about this board. It's very diverse. And that's a good thing. Very good thing. So we have a motion on the table. And we can, let me just take Aaron's thought. Is it possible to, you say 2 stories and then you just take the height off? Or has that gotten so ambiguous and so vague?
Yeah, you can do that. The concern is that you lose the 30-foot specificity. You could have floors have different heights.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have 2 stories at one height, you could have 2 stories at another height altogether.
I understand that. I guess the reason why I brought that up is because I understand that the restriction of 30 feet, it's hard to work within that. I mean, there's all kinds of equipment or, who knows? I'm not a developer, I'm not a builder, but I can understand that keeping everything within 30 feet, a roof line, I mean, that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for a developer to do, whether it's financially feasible or otherwise, I think. So I'm wondering if 2 stories, I mean, even if we could say, I'd be fine with 36 foot. I mean, that's 2 commercial stories, 25 to 30 feet, and then perhaps some decorative material on top. I don't know. I'm not an architect, and I don't know if that's what is causing us to not get any developments presented to us. Is the 30 feet or the 2 stories? I'm not sure, but I'm just wondering which one of those. I'm pretty set on 2 stories. So that's why I'm kind of maybe a little bit more open to a less restrictive height.
Anybody else want to comment on something like that?
I would definitely second you on that.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Regis?
I would support that change to what was said by Trustee Toll.
Okay, all right.
I would not support that. I think the premise here is that if we're seeking alternatives, and we're truly seeking alternatives, and we are the final arbiter at the end of the day, then let's seek the alternatives and see what might be available. And if we're successful and we can find something, then we've added to the community. If we haven't, then the buck stops here. We say no. And I think that's the premise that we've taken thus far. So I would call the question to the matter that's been proposed.
Okay. Anyone else have any final thoughts before I do call the question?
I think the lack of public trust is significant and unfortunate, and it is having an impact on my vote.
Okay.
It is definitely having an impact on my vote. I wish it weren't that way, but I'm being honest and transparent. I would like to have more latitude, but I also know that person after person says that I trusted in the system, and I trusted, and I gave, and I sacrificed, and this is how it ended up. So I have to say that those stories are impacting me, and I now leaning toward not supporting keeping that.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Anybody else have anything they wish to say? And I will call the vote, and we'll see what happens.
May I suggest or move for a roll call instead of a voice, given the circumstance?
No, I will definitely do a roll call. Okay. All right. How about a roll call?
All right, trustee Engman.
So can we just say one more time? What we're saying is that we are going to leave in place, that would be a no, to leave in place the 30 feet.
Correct.
Right. you
So
say
if
that.
I say no, I'm saying we're going to leave the 30-foot.
The ordinance as written.
Right,
Yes.
right, you're leaving it as is.
Thank
Okay,
you.
All right.
Nay.
Trustee Charlo.
I'm in favor of a change to see what kind of development would be behind, so that would be a yes. But doesn't mean that my vote is not favorable to what could happen next. So it's a yes.
Trustee Dewar.
Yes.
Trustee Markey.
Nay.
Trustee Meyer.
No.
Trustee Toll.
Nay.
Okay. And it stands at
2-4.
2-4.
2-4, no.
Okay, well then, the
Ordinance
board has
fails on first
spoken.
reading.
It fails on first reading. Okay. Thank everyone for your participation. All right, we shall move on. Wait till everybody leaves. Number 16, which is an ordinance granting a special use permit for a restaurant and drinking place in bulk and parking variations. All right, Lawrence's English Pub. January 9th, 2020, the Village of Lake Bluff received a zoning release application from Lawrence Property, LLC, to enclose the former Lake Forest Bank and Trust drive-through at the southern end of 103 to 113 East Scranton Avenue and to repurpose it as an English pub, restaurant, and drinking place. The tenant space would accept pedestrian traffic from the west through the privately owned Scranton Alley as well as from the south by converting the Bank Drive aisle into a pedestrian walkway. This development requires the issuance of a special use permit, setback and parking variations, and site plan review. The PCZBA opened a public hearing concerning the requested special use permit at its February 19th meeting. At its conclusion of the hearing, the PCZBA recommended unanimously the village board grant the requested special use permit subject to various special conditions, including one, closure of former drive-through. The applicant will convert the drive-through into a pedestrian walkway and provide an easement assuring its future public access. Construction of public parking spaces. The applicant will construct and dedicate 3 new parking stalls at Oak Avenue, generally in the location of the former curb cut for the drive-through. Employee parking at the train station, consistent with other CBD restaurants. The employees of the restaurant will be required to park at the train station using an annual permit. Hours of operation. The restaurant's hours of operation are limited as follows: Monday through Friday between the hours of noon to 11 p.m. Saturday between the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. to midnight. Sunday between the hours of 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. The outdoor dining area will always close no later than 10 p.m. This condition may be amended by the village board by resolution without a subsequent application. At the ABR's March 3rd meeting, the ABR recommended approval subject to various design modifications. These modifications are currently listed in the ordinance. However, staff is working with the applicant to obtain a revised set of plans prior to second reading approval. The revised plans will include details regarding a replacement fence along the south property line, including design elements intended to reduce noise transmitted to adjacent condominium residents. After construction, the applicant would also be required to seek a liquor license. This would also require an amendment to the village code by the village board and issuance of a license by the village president in the capacity as liquor commissioner. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Markey.
Second?
And, was that Ms. Anchorman? I'm sorry. And second?
By Mr. Meyer.
Second.
Mr. Meyer. All right. At this point, do we have?
The petitioner's here. if you have
Petitions of here, I know, I see him there. Does he have anything that he would like to add to this? Or would you just like us to chat? Okay. It's been an interesting night already. Okay. All right.
I just had a question
Sure.
about the parking. So I think they were gonna add, from what I read, they're gonna add 3 parking spots on Oak Street. Is that right, Drew?
Yes.
Okay, and then it'll be pedestrian walkway through, so you'd be essentially walking through where the alley is now, where the
The
little
former
alleys.
drive-through location is on the, yes, correct, on the
Okay.
east side of the overall site, yeah.
Okay. And do we feel like that's enough parking? I guess that's I mean, we always talk about parking, but
Yeah.
the addition of 3 spots,
The PCZB was comfortable recommending that, yes.
okay.
Follow-up question to that, the parking just to the west of this proposal, is that tenant parking only for that building, or is that available?
It
to-
is behind Center Avenue Partners.
Yes.
Is private parking,
Private
yes.
parking, okay.
In terms of the capacity for the building itself, how many patrons could be sitting either at the bar or in the dining area? What would be the total capacity?
Gary, you want to come up here to the podium?
Gary Lawrence, 362 West Prospect, Lake Bluff. I think right now we're saying about 42 for the interior, and then I believe the outdoor garden area had, was it 10 seats in the outdoor garden area? Right.
I wanted to say first, thank you for this development idea. I think it's exciting. My family is a Premier League soccer family. We like to watch soccer. And so I was very excited to see that you were considering these Saturday morning hours when you can watch some of the games live. I was curious as to how you chose 10 a.m. to stop operating, because the games keep going, you know?
Uh-oh. We had done some checking over in Europe, and we were told they ended mostly at about 10.
Yeah, well, anyway, I'm just saying that.
That may be a special use permit then.
It's like 4 or 5 a.m. Europe.
Yeah, it never stops, it never stops.
10 p.m.
No, but in the morning, it says 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Saturday.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
he said it later on would be 4 o'clock in the morning in Europe.
Okay.
Unless we're looking at games in the Far East.
Anyway, I just wanted to say I appreciate the theme and the support of, bringing people together around something that's positive. And if my family came, that'd be 5 of the 42 spots taken up right there.
Thank you.
So, sorry, we might kind of take over.
That's right, thanks.
I do have a question about the plan itself. I noticed that the outdoor seating does not have any direct communication with the inside. Am I perceiving that correctly?
There's no pass-through, you mean?
No pass-through, yeah.
Thank you.
There is not a pass-through from the interior of the restaurant. I think in Scott's latest plans, I'm not sure how far those got with the village. Maybe you can speak to that. We had talked about a possible iron gate that would be at the back door, which is, the service entrance to the east. So staff could come out of the kitchen, out that door, and then go right into the garden. Otherwise, they would have to come out of the kitchen, through the entire dining room, down the alley, and then back in.
Well, that's exactly my point, and in
Right.
fact, that presumably then food and alcohol is going down the alley for some
Right.
distance.
So
and
we
I-
had
I
a
guess
gate that,
my
in the final plans, we
suggestion-
had looked at a gate on that east side, right opposite of the service door.
Okay, is that on the current plans or not? Maybe I missed it and I'm not looking at it right.
It's not,
It's not, yeah.
I'm looking at it right now. I was gonna comment that'd be a good place for them.
We had a number of revisions between the PCZBA meeting in response to some of the concerns to the ARB meeting. And in the ARB revised drawings, it shows an option for that gate. But I think they're requesting that we finalize all these plans and submit them for the second reading, so you'll have those at that point.
Okay, fair enough, because that's my concern, food and alcohol going through the alley. It's inconvenient, if anything else, for you.
I agree.
Have you spoken to any of the residents around that area yet, or are you not to that point yet? Kind of letting them know that there would be
We have,
some
I mean,
more activity?
Yeah, within our building there's no issues there. We talked to the church property tenants within our building, and then some of the residents behind the property in the condo building have also come to the ABR and the PCZBA to provide their opinion. We're trying to work with them, and that's with the fence area, whether, we can make that soundproof, which we can, a dual-sided fence with sound barrier, material in between.
Great.
So we have, and, they may speak tonight again too, so, yeah.
I like it. It's a neat idea. And I
Thank
think
you.
it's kind of one of those things that people would come to Lake Bluff and be like, did you find that little pub back? So
Thank you.
I think it's a neat idea.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Thank you, Gary. Okay. First, this is a first reading. What do you have here? Oh, that's right. This will be a first reading, but before we vote on it, does anyone have any comments or questions?
Jerry Klutsko, I live at 131 East Scranton, probably maybe one of the closest houses to this project. I'm in favor of it. I think it's a great little added. Since this came to my attention a few weeks ago at the zoning board meeting, I've been paying attention to the parking on Oak Avenue. And at nights when all the other restaurants are full, Oak Avenue's empty. So when we get to parking issues, I don't really think there's going to be any big problems there. I think it's a great little spot. I intend to go there. But I told him the other day, you better have a good burger. That's all I got to say. But so I'm in favor of the project. But just that's one little thing that I started watching when we started talking about parking, is that in the evenings, Oak Avenue is pretty much empty. So there goes that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment to make? Yes, ma'am, come on up.
Hi, Denise Petticord, 56 East Center Avenue. I live in the condo building that's just south of the proposed development. I really just have two questions. The first one is the statement that's underneath the hours of operation. Can you read that for me, and what does that mean?
This condition may be amended by the village board by resolution without a subsequent application.
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
So to clarify, unlike this process which brought it here, where there was a hearing, a public hearing at the Planning Commission Zoning Board of Appeals and a hearing at the Architecture Board of Review, this body could make that decision outside of a public hearing process. They would come in, but it would still require a public process. It would be one reading of a resolution. It's not like an ordinance where there's two separate readings. It's one resolution, would have one reading that this body could act on without seeking input from the advisory bodies.
Okay, so that means if there was a proposal to change hours, it would just come back to this board and you would vote?
They would have, yes, that would be the prescribed process, although that doesn't prevent them from sending it back to the ABR or the PCZBA, but that is the immediate pathway.
And would residents be informed of that before the vote was taken?
There is no notice requirement as part of that process, although the board could ask for that notice, but that's not prescribed.
I think the practice would be to notify them, right? I mean, that would be
I
the
would think
practice.
that would.
It's not written down, but the village could choose to do that, yes.
Okay.
Certainly, if you wanted to write that as part of this today, you could do that today, amend that to specify that.
We could do that.
Okay. I would want we within the condo building will want a chance to comment if the hours were going to be extended, especially later into the evening.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, as designs are still being reworked, when is an opportunity for the public to view those final designs?
So I'm not certain on your timeline when you're going to have revisions, Scott, to the plans, but what would happen is 2 weeks, no, wait, I'm sorry, it's not even 2 weeks from tonight, because this is the only meeting in March, so it will not be till the first meeting in April. So before that meeting, the village will post its materials, and I'm going to presume that it will be done certainly by that point. And we can make them available if you'd like to come and review them, certainly happy to do that. As soon as they are available, we can notify you.
Okay, but they don't come back into a formal meeting then?
They would come in front of this body as part of the final ordinance for the second
would.
reading.
Okay, so at that April meeting, then they would come
They
back?
would be exhibits to that ordinance.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay. And this is a voice vote. All in favor? What?
That amendment that we were just talking about, the public notice.
About the notice?
Okay, yes, let's place in there that there would, if there are any change in the hours,
So
that there would be a public notice.
that's some
I'll
language.
make a motion.
It's a public hearing. Okay, does that,
Um,
all
Can I
right?
give you the exact language?
You want to give me the exact
Yeah,
language?
just so we're
Thank you
clear,
so much.
because I need clarification on one aspect. Under D, it would read, unless otherwise approved by the Village Board of Trustees by resolution duly adopted after reasonable written notice in advance to, and then Drew, what's the,
We usually do 300 feet for zoning.
within 300, all property owners within 300 feet of the property.
That's the same notice we did for the PCZBA and the ABR, so.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay, with that amendment or change, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Now we will go back to the irregular agenda for the night. And we have the village finance reports for March 1 through 15 and February 2020 payroll. Keep looking at the clock. Oh, like, now we've been here a long time. Okay. We have the warrant report for March 1 through 15, 2020, and the February 2020 payroll expenditures. All right, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Meyer, and a second.
Second.
Okay, the dynamic duo, all right. I think I heard Ms. Ankerman first, but I'm not sure.
Ms. Markey?
Mrs. Markey, I didn't hear her. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll speak up.
I've already broken one of these things tonight. I'll try not to break the other one. All righty, so we have expenditures of village funds for payment of invoices in the amount of $417,205.84 for March 1 through 15, and expenditures of village funds for payment of payroll in the amount of $295,150.10 for February. Total expenditures of $712,355.94. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you, and then we will have a roll call vote for that.
Trustee Charlo.
Yes.
Trustee DeWart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Okay, village administrators report.
Thank you. A couple things that are not in front of you, but just more informational reports. One, as I mentioned earlier, this is the only meeting of the village board this month because of the spring break. There's going to be a lack of a quorum, so we're not going to meet at the fourth meeting. It'll be the first meeting in April, the second Monday will be the next meeting of this body. The other thing I wanted to mention is, let me find my note. The Roanoke Group, the Stonebridge, has submitted an application to the village to amend its planned residential development that governs that property now. The new plan does, again, shouldn't be a surprise, does call for the demolition of the mansion and gatehouse. It calls for 98 units. And it's going to the Plan Commission Zoning Board of Appeals next Wednesday, I think. And so that'll be, we'll go through that public hearing process, and it's a preliminary, essentially they're starting over. And it's going to be, it'll ultimately come back to this body if they continue through the process and end up here through a preliminary plan and then a final plan. And, but that's starting, and I want to alert you all to that. It's been shared with the general public. It went out in our e-newsletter on Friday, and the group that, I'll call it our focus group for Stonebridge, that we've met with, a lot of concerned neighbors over the time, we've met with them and shared with them those plans already. So, and I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. I could add, and I don't want to steal your show.
Oh, no, please don't.
Okay. But village staff has been, like most employers and those other 8 entities that deal in public safety, have been planning and preparing with managing the coronavirus locally here with our public safety officials and staff, and have been made a lot of preparations and continue to do so. And again, I won't steal too much of your thunder knowing that you were going to mention this tonight. Thus concludes my report.
Okay. Well, obviously, yes, it does seem to be on everybody's mind for whatever. As most people know, the governor made a pronouncement that a state of emergency now exists in the state of Illinois. We're one of 13 states that has that. It primarily is done at this point to provide resources for our state in terms of state and federal aid. So they're coming on. Again, everyone is reiterating, please avoid personal contact. I'm not quite sure what that means, but stay within 6 feet. Cover your mouth, wash your hands, stay home when you're sick, please, and all of the common sense things that everybody has. And I think that I will reiterate that everyone, in terms of our first responders, our public safety, our municipal, our school and park district, are in close communication with each other and with the Lake County Health Department. Several of us attended a meeting last Wednesday to get some of the more current information from the Lake County Health Department, and also a lot of the physicians involved with that. So we are keeping on top of it as we can, that those things seem to be changing as each day comes upon us. So also just a thing, if you have elderly neighbors or things, just check on them and make sure everything is okay. The other one I'd like to do is the appointment of Jill, Dom, and Rosa to the Senior Resources Commission. We have an opening there. I think in your packet you received the application and Jill's resume, which is impressive. And I think she would be a great asset to the Senior Resources Commission, particularly as we are exploring options. And I think, Barbara, you mentioned some of that in terms of the cottages out there, how we might be able to be a part of that. Any questions on that one? So I think I have to, all right, so that would be that. Also,
vote on that.
yeah, I will, just a second. And we shall vote on that in just a second. But I do also want to mention that Wednesday night is the Historic Preservation Commission is meeting, and Susan Benjamin, who is a preservation consultant who has undertaken she's an architectural consultant, an entire community survey of all of our homes and public buildings in the entire community. 15 years ago, she did one on basically the east side, what we call the camp meeting side.
And the estates too, wasn't it?
And the estates, correct. This time it is now including the entire community in Terraces, Belforet, Tangley Oaks. So we have a comprehensive picture, snapshot, if you will, of the architectural and historic significance of our community. She is going to be presenting the findings of her survey Wednesday night. It might be interesting for people who are interested in architecture and history to go there. Now, to go back to the thing, I will need a motion to appoint Jill Rosa to the Senior Resource.
So moved.
Thank you, sir, very much. All right, Mr. Dewart. Second
Second.
by, okay, Mr. Charlot. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We now have the village attorney's report.
No report tonight.
And I skipped you, and I'm sorry, because I know you like to talk. Acceptance of the correspondence. Please note all correspondence was delivered to the Village Board of Trustees and the informational reports on February 21st and 28. All right, do I have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
So moved, okay, by Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second.
And the second by Ms. Markey. Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Number 4, I'm sorry, 14? Okay, request to move up, what, number 14?
No objection.
No objection? No objection. Okay, I'm sorry, yes, please, let's do that. I apologize. An ordinance amending the Lake Bluff zoning regulations and the Lake Bluff Municipal Code to extend the short-term rental regulations for an additional year. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Dewar. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Charlot. All right, this is the second reading approval. Do I have any comments, questions from you? Yes, you certainly may.
I guess I'm here to answer any other questions, and I wanted to address some concerns that I've heard repeated, which was the decrease in property value of a neighbor and families. As I mentioned earlier, the decrease in the property value, I don't agree with that, because 2 weeks out of a year is not going to make a big difference. Also, I'd like to get on the record, hopefully someone's listening, that an adjacent driveway definition is any driveway that is within 5 feet of another driveway. Those two homes cannot have a guest over for even 2 weeks. Anything less than 30 days, they're not allowed to, okay? For safety. Now think about this. 5 feet between two driveways. You can have a quarter-long driveway, but if it's adjacent anywhere in 5 feet, you can't do it. And it's that I would like to see addressed. And even the zoning board, they had mentioned it just doesn't make sense. If someone has a 3-car garage, they have ample backyard parking, why can't they have a guest over a couple weeks a year? It's a homeowner right. It's not as if the homeowner might be leaving the property and renting out the whole place. They're staying in the residence, and they're going to be living there, and they're going to be opening their doors. If you want to maximize it at 2 weeks a year, do so. But don't take away a property right. And specifically for me, you decrease my home value by taking away my right. I don't understand that. And as far as families, I hear this a lot. Aaron was the first trustee over. I was very emotional when this first began 3 years ago or so. He was the first one over at my dining room table, and he seemed a lot of empathy, listening. And then the third thing he said to me was like, I'm looking for an investment property. This would be a good investment property. And all of a sudden it clicks to me. It's not a family issue, it's an investment property issue? Just saying. It comes to me now, because it can't possibly be a family issue. And let me tell you why. I have families that are U.S. residents and they're out in Africa. A young family contacted me. They have a 4-year-old and a 6-month-old, and they want to stay they're spreading the good word in Africa. They're living there. They want to stay for 3 weeks. And I have to say, I'm sorry, I'll be fined $5,000 a night if I let you stay in my home while I live in it. I have grandmothers come in. I have people who want to come live here, who are relocating to the area looking for housing, and I'm not allowed to use my bill as rental while I live in the house for any amount of time less than 30 days. So yeah, I could add more, but I don't want to take your time. I have a lot more I can add, but you've heard it all before. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else like to speak? Okay. Did I do a first and second on this one? I did, didn't I? Okay. Second reading, this is a roll call vote.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Nay.
Trustee Ankman.
Nay.
Trustee Charlotte.
Aye.
righty. We are now on, I'm getting confused. All right, did I do number? I did not do number 11. It is exciting. A resolution authorizing the purchase of a new fuel tank gauge and a fuel management system at the Public Works Garage. Do I have a motion? Let's see on this one. Do I have a motion?
So moved?
And so moved by Mr. Meyer. Do I have a second?
Second.
And second by Ms. Ankerman.
Ms. Markey.
Ms. Markey. God, I'm having to do
Gotta be
things
louder.
today. I
Sorry.
sorry about it.
That's all right.
Okay, FY 2020 village budget includes $25,000 for new public works fuel management system. System replaces existing technology utilized for fleet operations to control access and monitor the underground fuel storage tanks for leaks. The present equipment is over 20 years old and is no longer supported or compatible with current computer operating systems. Data collected and measured by the new management system will be automatically sent via a network connection to software providing real-time on-site reporting, monitoring access, and consumption. Public Works Department recommends the combined purchase of $25,890 from Stenstrom for the fuel management system, Fuel Master, manufactured by SyncTech System, $15,430, and the automatic tank gauge, Veeder-Root, manufactured by Gilbarco, $10,460, under the Sourcewell NJPA Purchasing Cooperative. All right. Do we have any comments or questions from the board, or from further illumination from Jake?
I do have one question. I know in times past, we've talked about outsourcing the fuel. I assume that that's off the table if we're investing in this manner?
This is a minor investment. You'll have a chance in future budgets to talk about replacing the underground storage tanks.
Oh, yeah, I guess that would be right, wouldn't it? All right.
It's not too far off.
Well, maybe
kicked it around, yeah.
tell us about that then.
What is the?
Well, it's something that right now, our insurance is sliding scale based off the age of our tanks. So the idea at some point that may become not palatable to keep paying that. But I mean, the good news is our system is operating totally fine. And we've had some very minor discussions internally, I'll say very preliminary discussions about getting out of the fuel business, but most of the time it's come back to let's have the option here on site, both from public safety and from public works for ease of operations and the cost that we've invested to date. But that, at some point, we'll have to have the conversation when it becomes, now it's time to replace. And I hesitate to think, is it 10 years from now when it's insurance?
That's probably something we'd have a consultant
Yeah,
do for us. You know, it's been in the ground a long time. And there's costs associated. Even if we were to say, hey, we're out of the fuel business, there's going to be a good chunk of cost just to remove all the existing equipment. That's why a lot of places recommend you keep it, because if you're going to pay to remove all that contaminated soil, whether it's contaminated or not, I'm sorry, I'm putting the quotes up there, because it doesn't, it's not saying that everything's leaking at all times, but there's a certain number they hit. They say they're going to have to remove all this because there were fuel tanks in the ground. So no matter what we do, if we were to privatize or, go get out of the fuel business, start back over, do above ground tanks. There's options. There's lots of different options.
Our EOP now, we have contingency plans around having fuel on site as primary, and then there's secondary sources that we have, plans built around that, and all that would have to go into part of the calculus there. But at some point, we'll have to decide whether or not this is a minor investment in a system just to make sure it's working as we believe it has been, and based off our inspections to date, it is. And all this information goes to the State Fire Marshal's office to make sure we're meeting our specs.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
I had talked to you earlier. We don't anticipate any additional costs. There was a little section in the back of that quote that said, if there's extra work that's not specifically noted, electrical or piping work, we don't think there's going to be
Currently,
any
right now,
surprises.
no. Yeah, I don't think there's any surprises with this one.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Thanks, Jake. Okay, roll call, please.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherlow.
Aye.
Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Okay, number 12, a resolution approving a professional engineering service agreement with Baxter and Woodman Incorporated. Phase 1 design agreement for Green Bay Road Bridge Rehabilitation Project. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Dewart, and a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Toll. The village has secured federal funding through the Surface Transportation Program Bridge, STP-BR, for the replacement of the superstructure of the bridge on Green Bay Road over the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. The current bridge was constructed in 1988, and the bridge deck beams and other elements have deteriorated to the point where they will need to be replaced in the next several years. The project has been awarded STP-BR funding, which will pay for 80% of the Phase 1 engineering, Phase 2 engineering, and Phase 3 construction costs. The 3 phases of the bridge project are estimated to cost a total of $2.25 million, of which $1.8 million will be federal funds and $475,000 will be village funds. The construction schedule is dependent on the village securing federal funding for the Green Bay Road reconstruction project and is likely to happen in either 2022 or 23. In compliance with federal funding requirements, the village requested qualified engineering firms submit a statement of qualifications, SOQ, for performing the Phase 1 work for the project. 5 firms submitted SOQs, and the village personnel determined the most qualified and responsive firm was Baxter and Woodman of Crystal Lake, Illinois. Baxter and Woodman subsequently submitted a proposal to complete Phase 1 of the project for a fee not to exceed $109,967.88. The agreement has been approved by the Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT, and calls for the village to pay the consultant directly for engineering work and for IDOT to reimburse the village for 80% of the funds expended. The village's proposed FY 2021 budget includes $110,000 for Phase 1 of the project. The village's capital improvements fund has available funds to spend a portion of the budget in the current fiscal year, which is estimated about $35,000, and has recommended the village board approve the agreement and expend a portion of the funds in the current fiscal year to move the project forward without delay. Comments or questions?
I just had a question, asking for a reminder about how does the 80% reimbursement work? Do we pay up front and then submit paperwork after the fact to get that reimbursement?
Yes, we pay the consultant as they bill us, and then we submit to IDOT, and they cut us a check.
And that's a lengthy process, or?
Takes them about 60 days, 60 to 90 days to
Thank you.
reimburse us.
Okay.
You had low expectations, I can tell that when you asked.
I did. I did when I read it, yeah.
As long as they are,
Right.
not shut down, which is happening.
Yeah, I know.
Do it quick.
Yeah, please. Okay.
Jeff, would you remind the board about the staging with the road segment, or push for that, as well as, combining that with this project, how we're trying to get that sequence?
Yes, so we have, later this month, we'll submit our funding application for the road project, and that is they fill a 5-year window. There's some conflicting information about how much of that money's already spoken for, so we have a good application. We're just hopeful that it will rate high enough, or they'll have enough money left in the pot to fund that in that window. But we are trying to move this along as quickly as possible so we can marry the two schedules as best we can, so when the funding is available for the street, the bridge will be ready. Right now, the bridge is lagging a little bit behind the street, which is why we want to push this as fast as we can to get the bridge moving.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, this is a roll call vote.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherlow.
Aye.
Trustee Dewart.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
We now have a resolution approving a site plan to replace the dumpster enclosure at the Public Safety Building at 45 East Center Avenue. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Toll. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Ankerman. The existing enclosure around the dumpster and generator behind the safety building is worn and in need of repair and paint. The walls of the enclosure are also too close to the generator, interfering with the required airflow for cooling. With the recommendation of the Architectural Board of Review, the Village Board has approved a site plan to modify the existing enclosure at their December 9th, 2019 meeting, enclosing only the dumpster and not the generator. During the discussion at the ABR, some members have commented on the desirability of enclosing the dumpster with wood fence instead. Staff has since found a good quality 6-foot wood fence that can be installed within budget. The proposed new fence was reviewed by the Architectural Board of Review at their meeting on March 3rd, and they recommended the fence be stained either white or tan to match elements on the building, and voted 4-0 to recommend the Village Board approve the site plan. Any comments or questions from the board?
I'll just add, I spoke on the phone earlier today with Trustee Ankerman, who had a question regarding the noise attenuation that the fence may be providing to some neighbors. Good news is neighbors aren't super close to the property. But I would add that, and Mike, you're the subject matter expert on this, Mike Croak, our facilities manager, in addition to being building code supervisor, had worked through this, and there's really two primary sources of noise for the generator. One is the muffler, the main muffler, and that's actually pointed directly up, so that's not changing or won't be impacted by the absence of a fence. The other is a, what's on the west side, Mike? I was hoping I couldn't remember what it was exactly. The air exchange, or?
Yeah, the coolant fan. So the coolant fan blows out the west side, and that's blowing through louvers in the enclosure that are pretty widely spaced. So I guess, two things about that. One is the noise comes out through the same louvers that the airflow comes out, so it's not really blocking much of that noise. But the good news is it is pointed to the west, so it's directed away from any residential structures. And of course, the generator is over 250 feet away from the nearest house, so it's a long ways away.
What's the frequency of the use of the generator?
It has two options for its automatic exercise and testing. It can be set to either once a week or twice a week. I think right now it's set for once a week or once every 2 weeks. Right now it's set to once a week, I think, but we're planning to reset it to once every 2 weeks because
Like
we
the
don't have
facility
to
here.
every week. Yeah.
And I would say from experience, in the last 12 years, the longest I remember running continuously, I think, was for 7 days, the week of July 11th, 2011.
Oh, yeah.
But that's the longest it's ever ran.
Generator?
The generator.
But ordinarily, the test cycle is
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it the other generator, is that the same size?
As the Village Hall generator?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember the horsepower I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's smaller than the Village Hall
It's
generator.
gotta be.
Yeah, I think so.
Because, have you ever listened to it with your windows open? It's loud.
Right.
Very loud.
Yeah.
There's actually some money in the budget that you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we're working on doing some noise reduction on this generator. We've, our generator maintenance company that, works with the manufacturer initially said they didn't have a enclosure for it that's more noise attenuating, but they've come up with a plan to put a more noise attenuating enclosure on it. And then we've also found some people who make some sound absorbing panels that can be put on the fence and on the brick walls. So right now the brick walls it doesn't help. Those are reflecting a lot of the
That would be
sound
heaven.
off of it.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And I think
Right.
it's pretty sizable impact, the decibel.
Yeah, they were saying up to 15 decibels in reduction.
That is actually quite a bit.
Yeah, right, yeah,
It does feel like I'm sitting on the runway at O'Hare.
yeah.
Thank you.
That's about a 50% reduction, probably.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
That's good.
Thanks,
Right.
Mike.
Sure, no problem.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it. Okay, anybody else have anything on that? All right, that's a roll call, please.
Trustee Toll.
Aye.
Trustee Ankerman.
Aye.
Trustee Charlo.
Aye.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustees report. Anybody tonight? All right, I'm going to have a motion to go into executive session to discuss litigation,
And meeting minutes.
and also the minutes of the February 24th, 2020 executive session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer, and a
Second.
second by Mr. Charlo. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
We need a roll call to go into closed session.
No, roll call, sorry. Roll call, bib.
Trustee Ankman.
Aye.
Trustee Sherla.
Aye.
Trustee Dewar.
Aye.
Trustee Markey.
Aye.
Trustee Meyer.
Aye.
Trustee Toll.
All right.